Thank you for tuning in this week with the, 27th episode of the Old Code Podcast. I want to thank everyone, for your support, for your encouragement. I'm really proud to be able to be doing this, and I just really appreciate everything, every comment, and every just encouraging word. I really appreciate your thoughts as well. So if you have any topics you'd like to see covered or just hear me talk about, then drop me a line. All my contact information, which is basically just an email, or leave a comment on one of the videos. So with that being said, I want to state the topic of the video today is going to be, or of the podcast, is power is not the problem. There's a quote from old English lord. His name was Lord Action, of all things, which I find kind of a little bit silly, but whatever. It states, and this is the origin of the phrase, power corrupts. Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Great men are almost always bad men, even when they exercise influence and not authority. Still more when you superadd the tendency of the certainty of corruption by authority. So today's episode is really centered on, and this is kind of coming on the heels of the episode that I focused on with Marxism. It's the idea in our culture that power always will corrupt, and people in power are going to be corrupted by that position of power. Now, my primary thesis for this is that it is not power which corrupts, but weakness which corrupts positions of power. For the most part, this is a Nietzschean concept. Nietzsche discussed the idea that it is not the power itself, but rather weakness corrupts the individual. And if I'm remembering correctly, his thesis and his theory was in that same vein of saying that the one who desires power desires it out of a want of power because they lack power. And so it is coming from a position not of strength but of weakness. So before we can really move on, let's get our definitions straight. Let's get our definitions in order, because really that's where the problem starts. Is we start off again with this very Marxist understanding of power, in stating that it is simply the ability to hold control over people, and that the idea of it being purely about control over other people, it's a very Marxist idea, because control automatically has connotations of being overbearing or tyrannical. It automatically just assumes that one is going to abuse that control as well. So I would like to offer up my definition of power as power is the capacity to exert one's will upon other people. Now, this is a more open definition as opposed to how our culture typically defines it. So instead of control, it's the exertion of will. Now, this leaves it a little bit more open. Like I said, in the context of a law is actually the exertion of will upon other people. It's being able to state that this is something that a small group of people believe to be beneficial for the mass collective of the people. And really that's a bit more of the idea of what power is. Power is really where authority and strength, actually, I won't even necessarily tie in strength quite yet, because there are a great many people who are in positions of power who do not have strength in and of themselves. However, because they have influence over other people and those people possess strength, they are able to exert their authority and exert their will upon other people. So an appropriate exertion of power and an appropriate exertion of will is what you really see in, like I said at the beginning, the law. It's in a king's or a judge's ruling. That is their exertion of will put upon other people. And again, this is not always necessarily a bad thing. We kind of chalk it up to a bad thing because we live in a very libertarian and Marxist environment that assumes that any infringement upon one's own liberty is an infringement upon the person. Now, to take that definition of an infringement upon personal liberty equals an infringement upon personhood is to outrightly believe in an anarchist or a explicitly anti-authoritarian culture, which then naturally devolves into its own sort of feudalism, because in people believing that they should have the right to do whatever they so please, you fall into the problem of where does morality fit into all of this. So, it opens up bigger problems than it seeks to solve. So, I've tried to develop my own. I don't typically go off of an outline for these episodes. So, with this particular episode, I've tried to fashion an outline. So I hope that this provides a little bit more structure, but I'd like to provide a distinction between strength and power. What I wrote was, whereas power is the capacity to exert one's will upon others, strength is simply the capacity to effectively repel an opposing force. I'd like to expand that a little bit further in saying that strength is the ability to maintain control over self. So if we look at, again, a physical example of strength, strength is not merely the ability to lift up the weight, but it is the ability to maintain one's position in a given range of motion in relation to the weight. So it's more about controlling yourself than simply controlling the weight. So you have an exertion of force, which against an opposing force, exertion of force against an opposing force, versus, or not versus, but complemented by one's own control of self. So power does not necessitate control over oneself. Thus, where strength is the personal ability to overcome an opposing force, power may actually integrate the strength of others into the ability to maintain influence over those others, in a sense. So, in this, power is something which is neutral by definition, but it can lend itself to becoming a theater for atrocity when assumed by those who are weak of character, or weak of conviction, for that matter. So it is not power which corrupts the position of power, but rather it is weakness which corrupts the position of power. Because when you look at every deficiency in positions of power, very rarely do you find that it actually traces itself back to strength or the idea of power. And you can see this. So let's take two examples, and I wrote on this a while back, two examples of the corruption of the position of a king. Now you have a tyrant and you have an abdicator. The tyrant, when they seize control over the throne and become so enthralled with their own position of king that they forget the responsibilities that come with being a king, this is not a surplus of strength when you actually examine it. No, they are overexerting their will upon the people that they ought to be leading, governing, and guarding. But the weakness comes in at a point of character. So for the king who is a tyrant, they are not demonstrating a superabundance of strength. They are actually demonstrating an inability to control themselves because they're allowing their own selfishness to govern them. That is an absence of strength when it comes to and I should say that these opposing forces are not simply external to themselves, it is even internal to themselves. So selfishness is the opposing force of immorality in relation to other people. So the tyrant is experiencing a superabundance of selfishness and self-centeredness, which is a weakness, as they are unable to even control themselves. The tyrant will also sacrifice other people for the sake of their own benefit. This is a lack of strength in understanding humility. It takes strength to actually be a humble person, to put other people before yourself in regard to their importance. It takes strength to be compassionate and merciful. Mercy actually necessitates strength because you have the ability to recognize the actual amount of damage and how much. I think actually it just ought to be said, think of how much strength it takes to forgive somebody else or to show grace and kindness. That takes a remarkable amount of strength and self-control to not simply let one's wrath and rage off the chain. So that's the image of the tyrant, and we actually see that it's not an image of strength and control, but actually it's a picture of weakness and complete lack of control. They seize control over those around them because they cannot themselves control themselves. The abdicator is a much clearer illustration of weakness because they're simply saying, I don't want this position. I don't want to make any of these decisions in my life. Now, let me double check on time really quick here. Okay, yeah, we're still doing good. So, if strength is the ability to control oneself and press back against an opposing force, then weakness is its opposite. Weakness is the inability to exercise control over oneself and the absolute bending of character. And you see this both with the tyrant and with the abdicator. And I'd like to tie this back into the practical and demonstrate how this is actually how we can lead in our lives. So a lot of men, as particularly in the capitalistic, conservatistic society, they end up drifting into the tyrannical position of power as opposed to a good kingly position of power. And this is most markedly because of their own lack of self-control. So think of the number of times when you see people start to exhibit tyrannical forces of power only for their own sins to be revealed later on. We can think there's multiple instances throughout history, and goodness, I really should have prepared an exact example for this, but actually, you know what, I will just say, I think one of the best examples of this in today's day and age would be somebody like Andrew Tate. Now, Andrew Tate is someone who demonstrates not any sort of regard for the well-being of others, but rather seeks to benefit off of other people's benefits. And he does this through things such as pyramid schemes, things through call girl and webcamming associations. There was a great video of this a while back with him just bragging about taking advantage of other men's weakness and loneliness and insecurity through his webcamming business. So he's taking advantage of other people's weakness and exerting his will upon other individuals because they themselves lack power and control. So he's accumulating power by means of exploiting other men's absence of power. So this is a fantastic example of the tyrant, and this is broadly this tends to gravitate conservatives in attraction. For the liberals, the abdicator is more so the image that they gravitate towards, the abdicator is the one, and particularly if you look at someone like, and again, I'm making everybody upset today, but someone like Destiny, who had recently been cuckolded in his own polyamorous relationship. It's the absolute desire to repel any sort of position of personal power and personal responsibility. And therefore, because he refused any sort of exclusivity with his wife, somebody else came in and probably actually exerted a greater sign of strength or force or power or something along those lines, which attracted the wife. This is really what you see in a lot of younger liberal men. They end up becoming the prototypical beta male type position, and therefore they are rejecting any sort of position of authority, power, or strength. The point that I'm trying to get at with all of this is actually the image of the healthy masculinity or healthy leader is not one of control. It's not one that's defined by their power, but rather power is always meant to be wielded by those possessing strength of character and strength of conviction. I will go back to, and maybe I should do an episode on goodness of character and goodness of conviction, but when you see these marked examples of abuse of power and abuse of position, we assume that it is the position which corrupted the individual, instead of the other way around, where the individual or the weakness of the individual corrupted the position. I think one of the reasons why we oftentimes assume that it is the position which corrupts the individual is because we currently have a system and a society which actively encourages people of those degenerate moral qualities to seize hold of the positions. So really, in our contemporary modern capitalistic culture, we actually actively encourage those with sociopathic and narcissistic traits to be able to climb towards the top. We demonstrate that if you have a low regard for other people's boundaries, if you have a low regard for other people's welfare, you are shrewd in terms of business, which means that you are willing to cut corners and actively cut people off from the maximum that they are able to get, that they are going to excel at business. And the same goes with our political schema. Our political schema actively necessitates that people are good at hiding their own sins, good at hiding their own cowardice, and good at lying about their own actual convictions. And you can see this with liberals and conservatives alike, especially when you see a conservative start talking about, particularly in terms of homosexuality. I believe it was the president of Liberty University, and he wasn't a politician, of course, but when he was actively speaking this conservative lifestyle, all the while having a homosexual relationship, I believe with his pool boy or something along those lines, we are actively encouraging individuals who are good at hiding their sins, and who are really good at destroying other people. And those are the people in our contemporary system who are great at climbing social ladders. So again, it's not about the position of power that is corrupting the people, but rather we have a system in place which actively encourages those who are morally degenerate to seize hold those positions of power. The point that I'm trying to get at is that power is not the problem in these relations. Power is not the issue. Power stands as a theater for abuses of the position, but power is neutral by and large. Same with money. Money is by and large a neutral thing. Power is just the ability to exert will upon other people. And you have power in your family, you have power amongst your friends when you are in a particular position, or in the government, or anything along those lines. People need to start cultivating is not the pursuit of power, it is the pursuit of wisdom, goodness, and strength. Power in and of itself is a means by which we are able to affect greater change. But instead of, first of all, encouraging the people who are really good at hiding their sins, really good at taking advantage of other people, we need to start looking at those moral qualities in other people that are actually moral. In modern society, what we have decided to venerate is the worst parts of the entrepreneurial mindset, instead of those qualities that actually make a good leader. And those qualities that actually make a good leader are the willingness to sacrifice oneself, the willingness to go against the crowd, the willingness to be humble, the willingness and ability to be strong, the willingness and ability to desire the good of others, even if it is at one's own expense. And we can see the best example of this in the person and work of Christ. So Christ, being God, had all power in all of creation. But the point is that he forsook the grandeur of that power in order to serve his people. So I don't want to necessarily jam my theological purview into this particular paradigm, but if you want an image of a good leader, it is someone who is a servant leader and someone who serves by leading and leads by serving. And you need both of those, or else you are going to fall into the trap of either the tyrant or the weakling, the weak abdicator. And again, both of them are images of weakness, but we need to understand that it is not power that corrupts, but the weakness of character which corrupts the position of power. So I hope that this episode encourages you not to pursue power, but to pursue those things which actually enable those good positions of power. So I hope you are encouraged to pursue strength of character. I hope you pursue wisdom. I hope you pursue goodness. I hope you pursue mercy and compassion. I hope you pursue fairness and discipline and contentment in all of these things, because really without any of these, the position of power will be corrupted. If you are not content in your current position, you are going to desire greater and greater power. And again, you have to ask yourself the question of, why do you want the power? Do you want to control other people, or do you want to affect a greater extent of change and goodness in this world? So that's all I got for you today. I hope that this episode made sense, and I hope that this episode finds you well. As per usual, if you like the episode, leave a comment or like and subscribe when it comes to any of the platforms that allow such a thing. I believe Spotify allows comments, but particularly YouTube. This is just me trying to fight back against the idea that if you want a position of power, then you are already corrupted. But definitely examine why you want power, or why you want a position of power. Do you want to actually affect moral change in the world, or do you just want to have your way with people? And again, that's all I got for you. Hope you liked this. And I will catch you on, hopefully, the Friday episode, if I am able to put one out. So, again, life is crazy, but I always enjoy talking to you guys. And, yeah, I appreciate you. That's all for now.